Page 139. "Chopped up worms," she gleefully told everyone. "Why, Ramona," Beezus was shocked. "They aren't either. They're filled with ground-up figs, you know that." Ramona did not answer. Her mouth was full of fig Newtons. Beezus passed the plate to a boy named Joey. "I don't like worms," he said. "I don't like worms," said the next little girl, who had applesauce all over her chin. Beezus noticed that Ramona was beginning to scowl. When Howie refused a cookie, it was too much for Ramona. "You eat that," she shouted. "I won't," yelled Howie. "You can't make me." Ramona jumped up, spilling her applesauce on the sheet. She thrust a nibbled fig Newton at Howie. "You eat that," she repeated as she stepped into the applesauce. "It's my party, and I want you to eat it." Howie knocked the cookie out of her hand. Ramona grabbed a handful of fig Newtons and thrust them at Susan. "Eat these," she shouted. Susan began to cry. "They're full of worms," she sobbed. "I don't like worms." "They're pretend worms," yelled Ramona. "No, they're not," cried Susan. "They're real." "You eat these," Ramona yelled, thrusting her handful of cookies at the children, who backed away. Ramona stamped her feet and screamed. Then she threw the fig Newtons at her guests as hard as she could. "My mother won't let me eat worms," shouted a little boy. Ramona threw herself on the floor and kicked. "Ramona, stop that!" Mother appeared from the kitchen with Willa Jean balanced on one hip. She grabbed Ramona by one arm and tried to drag her to her feet, but Ramona's legs were like rubber. "All right, Howie, forward march," Beezus ordered, hoping to draw attention from Ramona. No one moved. It was much more fun to see what was going to happen to Ramona. "This is my party. They're supposed to eat the refreshments." Ramona howled, banging her heels on the floor. "Ramona, you're acting like a 2-year-old. You may go to your room and close the door until you can behave yourself," said Mother quietly. Ramona kicked harder to show that she was not going to mind unless she felt like it. "Ramona," said Mother, even more quietly, "don't make me count to 10. Gasping with sobs, Ramona got up from the floor and ran into the bedroom, where she slammed the door as hard as she could. "All right, parade," said Mother wearily. "Forward march." Up and down, whistling, banging, tooting, marched the parade. Mother sat Willa Jean down and was just beginning to gather up the dishes and sheets when a car stopped in front of the house and Mrs. Kemp got out. "At last," sighed Mother, hurrying to the door. "I've come for Howie and Willa Jean," said Mrs. Kemp, as several other cars stopped in front of the Quimbys. The parade marched into the living room. "I don't want to go home," protested Howie when he saw his mother. "The party must have been a success," Mrs. Kemp observed. "It certainly was." Mother tried to push the uncurled side of her hair behind her ear and to smooth out her rumpled old dress. "I like to play parade," said Howie, "but I didn't like what they had to eat." "Why, Howie?" scolded Mrs. Kemp. "We must remember our manners." Ramona, her face streaked with tears, came out of her room and stood staring unhappily at her departing guests. When the last child had struggled into his boots, she looked tearfully at her mother. "I'm behaving myself now," she said meekly. Mother dropped wearily into a chair. "Ramona, if you wanted a party, why didn't you ask me to have one?" "Because when I ask, you don't let me do things," explained Ramona, sniffling. Beezus couldn't help feeling there was some truth in Ramona's remark. She had often felt that way herself, especially when she was younger. "Mother, did I do things like Ramona when I was 4?" she asked. "You did some of the things Ramona does now," said Mother thoughtfully, "but you were really very different. You were quieter, for one thing." This pleased Beezus. One of the reasons she sometimes disliked Ramona was that she was never quiet when she could manage to be noisy. "Of course, there are some things that all 4-year-olds do," Mother continued, "but even sisters are usually different. Just the way your Aunt Beatrice and I were different when we were girls. I was a bookworm and went to the library 2 or 3 times a week. She was the best hopscotch player and the fastest rope jumper in the neighborhood, and she was better at jacks than anybody in our whole school." This surprised Beezus. She had never thought about her mother and aunt as children before. She tried to picture her school teacher, Aunt, jumping rope, and found her surprised that it was not very hard to do. Of course, Mother and Aunt Beatrice must have been different when they were girls, because they were so different now that they were grown up. And she was glad they were different. She loved them both. "Did I have tantrums too?" Beezus asked. "Once in a while," said Mother. "I always dreaded cutting your nails because you kicked and screamed." Beezus could not help feeling silly. Imagine having a tantrum over a little thing like having her fingernails cut. Then Ramona spoke up. "I don't cry when you cut my fingernails," she boasted. "Yes, but you scream when you have your hair washed," Beezus could not help reminding her. "Ramona," said Mother, "you were a very naughty girl this afternoon. What are we going to do with you?" Ramona stopped sniffing and looked interested. "Lock me in a closet for 1,000,000 years?" she suggested cheerfully. Mother and Beezus exchanged glances. How quickly Ramona recovered. "Make me sleep outdoors in the rain?" Obviously, Ramona was enjoying herself. "Not let me have anything to eat but carrots?" Mother laughed and looked at Beezus. "I'm afraid all we can do is wait for her to grow up," she said. And when Mother said "we" like that, Beezus almost felt sorry for Ramona, because she would have to wait such a long time to be grown up. Page 148, Chapter 6, Beezus's Birthday. When Beezus came home from school on the afternoon of her 10th birthday, she felt that so far the day had been perfect. Packages by her plate at breakfast, a new dress to wear to school, the whole class singing happy birthday, just for her. But the best part was still to come. Aunt Beatrice was coming for dinner. Beezus could hardly wait to tell her aunt about acting the part of Sacagawea, leading Lewis and Clark across the plains to Oregon at a PTA meeting. And of course, Aunt Beatrice would bring more presents, very special presents, because she was Aunt Beatrice's namesake. And at dinner, there would be a beautiful birthday cake with 10 candles. Mother had probably worked all afternoon baking and decorating the cake, and now had it hidden away in a cupboard. When Mother kissed Beezus, she had said, "I'm sorry, Beezus, but I'll have to ask you to keep Ramona out of the kitchen for a while." "Why?" asked Beezus, thinking her mother was planning a surprise. "So I can bake your birthday cake," Mother explained. "Isn't it baked yet?" exclaimed Beezus. "Oh, Mother." "This has been one of those days when I couldn't seem to get anything done," said Mother. "It was my morning for nursery school carpool. After I picked up all the children and drove them to nursery school and came home and did the breakfast dishes and made the beds, it was time to pick up the children and take them all home again. And after lunch, I started the cake and had just creamed the sugar and butter in the electric mixer when I was called to the telephone. When I came back, what do you think had happened?" "What?" asked Beezus, pretty sure Ramona had something to do with it. "Ramona had dropped all the eggs in the house into the batter and had started the mixer," said Mother. "Shells and all?" asked Beezus, horrified. "Shells and all," repeated Mother wearily. "And so I had to get out the car again and drive to the market and buy more eggs."